The eternal city of Arx gleamed like a beacon amidst the chaos of a planet where oceans of fire and mountains of ice coexisted in an impossible balance. It was here, in this world of extremes, that the Xerathis, one of the oldest and most revered species in the galaxy, gathered to decide the future. For millennia, they had prided themselves on their supremacy, a dominance built on the absolute harmony of their interconnected minds and their unparalleled technology. But something was changing. For the first time, this harmony had been disrupted, and the cause of this disturbance had a name: humanity. Humans, a species the Xerathis had initially dismissed as irrelevant, had begun to challenge galactic expectations. Unlike the perfectly balanced worlds of the Xerathis, Earth was a chaotic planet, filled with natural disasters, predators, and unpredictable conditions. To the Xerathis, this was a sign of weakness. To humans, it was the cradle of resilience. They survive not because they dominate, said Xerathis, one of the Council's most conservative leaders, but because they improvise. And that is dangerous. The decision to summon a human representative to Arx was not a gesture of diplomacy but an opportunity to test, and perhaps neutralize, this new variable. Darren Core, chosen to represent humanity, knew his mission would be more than diplomatic. He was standing before a species that would not only judge him but use his mind as an arena to prove the value or irrelevance of his kind. Upon arriving in Arx, Darren was awestruck by the grandeur of the Eternal City. Floating towers connected by pulsating streams of light seemed to defy the laws of physics, while the Xerathis, with their translucent forms and eyes that shone like stars, radiated unquestionable authority. "You are proof of a paradox," Xerathis said early on. "A fragile species that insists on surviving. We want to understand why." To the Xerathis, understanding was a weapon. They sought not empathy but control. Kaylin, a young and curious member of the Council, observed Darren with interest. Unlike her peers, she did not see humanity as a threat but as a fascinating enigma. "You are different," she said during one of their first interactions. "Not because you are strong, but because you are unafraid to fail." Darren, smiling, replied, "Perhaps it's because we've failed so many times that we've learned not to fear it." Such dialogue intrigued Kaylin but unsettled Xerathis, who saw in humanity an unpredictability that defied the order of the Xerathis. The climax of the introduction came with the announcement of a test. To understand humans, the Xerathis decided to subject Darren to a simulation designed to push his physical and psychic limits. "If your strength is real," Xerathis declared, "it will survive our judgment." For Darren, the test was not just about proving humanity's worth, but about showing the Xerathis that absolute control was not the only form of strength. As he prepared to face the unknown, a sense of determination grew within him. "They want to judge us," he thought, "but perhaps they are about to judge themselves." The test began in silence. Darren was led to a platform at the center of the main chamber, where the lights from the floating towers converged into a pulsating beam that seemed to pierce the very atmosphere. The Xerathis gathered around, their translucent forms glowing with an intensity that reflected both curiosity and skepticism. "You stand before judgment," Xerathis announced, his voice reverberating like distant thunder. "If your species deserves to exist among the stars, that will be decided here." Darren took a deep breath as the beam of light enveloped him. In an instant, he was transported into a simulation that was not physical but psychic. He found himself in a surreal valley, where ice mountains loomed over fiery oceans, and the sky pulsed like a living entity. Every element of the landscape seemed designed to disorient him, to test his instincts and his capacity to adapt. "They want to break me," he thought as he took his first step on the hostile terrain. "But maybe they underestimate what it means to be human." Within the psychic environment, Darren realized he wasn't alone. The voices of the Xerathis echoed in his mind, questioning every decision he made. "You are fragile," one voice said, as the scenery around him grew more unstable. Stones crumbled, and the fiery oceans surged in violent waves. "Your species survives only by chance," another accused, as creatures made of energy emerged from the ground, surrounding him. Darren, however, did not react with brute force. He analyzed the terrain, observing patterns in the creature's movements and the changes in the environment. With patience, he found a safe path, avoiding unnecessary conflicts. This approach caught the attention of Kalen, who was observing the test from a platform beside Cronies. "He doesn't fight as we would," she remarked, intrigued. "He doesn't try to dominate. He adapts." Cronies, on the other hand, saw this as confirmation of his distrust. "Adaptation is weakness disguised as skill," he replied with disdain. "They lack control. They simply survive chaos." But Kalen wasn't convinced. To her, there was something in Darren's movements, a balance between calculation and instinct, that challenged the rigid notions of strength held by the Xerathis. Midway through the simulation, Darren faced his first major dilemma. He encountered a giant creature trapped in an icy crevasse, its body pulsing with energy similar to that of Ark's towers. Logic dictated avoiding the creature, but something about the way it struggled to free itself stirred Darren's empathy. "You're not my enemy," he said, using improvised tools to free the creature. When it was finally released, instead of attacking, it became an unexpected ally, clearing a path through an otherwise inaccessible part of the valley. Darren's decision further divided the council. To Cronies, it was reckless. "He allies with what he does not understand," he declared with disdain. "This is exactly what makes them dangerous." But Kalen saw the situation differently. "He turned a threat into a resource," she argued. "That's not weakness. It's a different kind of strength." Darren, meanwhile, continued forward, aware that every step was a statement about what it meant to be human. The test culminated in a final challenge, an unstable bridge spanning an endless chasm. On one side lay safety, on the other an impossible choice. Reaching the middle of the bridge, Darren was confronted by a vision of his own failures, projected by the Xerathis. He saw images of human conflicts, of destruction wrought by his species, and heard voices accusing him of being part of something inherently flawed. "You are proof that weakness cannot be overcome," the voices said. But Darren, instead of retreating, faced the vision with surprising calm. "We are flawed," he said firmly, "but that's why we keep trying. Because we know we can always improve." When the simulation ended, Darren was on his knees, exhausted but triumphant. The heavy silence that followed was broken only by Kalen's voice. "He didn't break," she said, with a tone of admiration. "He showed us something we don't fully understand." Cronies, however, remained silent, though the tension in his posture revealed that, for the first time, his convictions had been challenged. For Darren, the test was not just a trial of strength. It was a reminder that even the most powerful minds could still learn something new. After the test concluded, the main chamber of the Eternal City was steeped in an uncomfortable silence. The Xerathis, known for their unwavering demeanor and collective harmony, now seemed divided. Kalen, her eyes glowing with excitement, observed Darren as though he were a puzzle she had just begun to solve. "He didn't just survive," she said, breaking the silence. "He changed the rules of the test itself." Cronies, on the other hand, remained motionless, his translucent glow flickering slightly as if struggling to process what had happened. "He adapted to chaos," he finally said, his tone heavy with disdain. "That is not strength. It is deviation." Though exhausted, Darren stood tall. He could sense something different in the Xerathis now, something that hadn't been there before: doubt. As he was escorted out of the chamber, he noticed the gazes of some of the younger leaders. They did not look at him with hostility but with curiosity. "They're starting to question," he thought. "But will it be enough?" On his way back to the tower where he was staying, Kalen approached him. "You've shaken something we thought was untouchable," she said, her voice a mix of admiration and concern. "But that could also be dangerous." While the council's more conservative leaders convened in secret to discuss the test's impact, Kalen led Darren to one of Ark's most sacred sites, the Chamber of Towers, where the Xerathis psychic network was anchored. The towers, appearing as pillars of living light, pulsed with an irregular energy, something Kalen had never seen before. "They're changing," she said, almost in a whisper. "Since the moment you arrived, the harmony has started to fracture." To Darren, This was a sign that the Xerathis were facing an internal conflict. "It's not my presence," he replied. "It's what it represents. You're discovering that perfection isn't the same as strength." As they explored the towers, Kalen revealed something surprising. The Xerathis psychic network was not merely a communication tool, but the foundation of their collective identity. Every thought, every decision was shared and refined until it became part of a greater whole. "But that means you have no room for failure," Darren observed. Kalen reluctantly confirmed. "Failures are eliminated before they can manifest. That's how we maintain control." To Darren, this explained why the Xerathis feared humanity so much. "We thrive in failure," he said, his tone a mix of challenge and compassion. "It's where we find our greatest strengths." Meanwhile, in the council chambers, Cronies made his move. He summoned the most influential leaders to propose a drastic measure, isolating humanity before its influence could spread. "They are not a species. They are a virus," he declared, his voice echoing with intensity. "If we allow them to continue, their chaos will infect everything we've built." But not everyone was willing to follow his reasoning. Some, inspired by Darren's performance in the test, began to question Cronies' logic. "Perhaps it's not chaos we should fear," said one of the younger leaders. "Perhaps we should learn to face it." While the council debated, Darren and Kalen made a disturbing discovery. During their exploration of the Chamber of Towers, they found an area that had been isolated. A section of the network the Xerathis had blocked to prevent imperfect ideas from contaminating their harmony. Driven by curiosity, Kalen unlocked the section, revealing a series of energy patterns that appeared human. "This doesn't make sense," she said as she analyzed the data. "These patterns are chaotic, but they work. They're forming new connections we've never seen before." The discovery shocked Kalen, but for Darren, it was a confirmation of what he had already suspected. The Xerathis perfection was crumbling because it couldn't accommodate the unpredictable. "What you're seeing," he said, "is what happens when you open yourselves to something new. It's not disorder. It's evolution." Though hesitant, Kalen began to see the truth in Darren's words. "But that means we would have to abandon who we are," she said, her tone laced with sadness. Darren shook his head. "Not abandon. Transform." As the council's debate reached its peak, Cronies played his final card, a proposal to completely disconnect the towers and isolate the psychic network. To him, it was better to sacrifice their collective harmony than to allow humanity to corrupt the system. "You would rather lose everything than accept what you might gain," Kalen said, publicly challenging Cronies for the first time. "Perhaps it's you who are afraid, Cronies. Afraid to discover that we can be more than we've ever been." The tension in the Eternal City was palpable, but Darren knew the real test had only just begun. The Xerathis faced a choice that would define their future: to embrace change and accept evolution, or to cling to a perfection that could no longer sustain their supremacy. To Darren, this was the essence of what it meant to be human. Not strength, but the courage to face the unknown. "They think they're judging us," he thought, "but perhaps they're judging themselves." The council's debate had reached a boiling point. On one side, Cronies insisted that disconnecting the towers was the only way to preserve the essence of the Xerathis. "If we allow these external influences to spread, we will cease to be who we are," he declared, his voice reverberating like psychic thunder. On the other side, Kalen argued that change was not only inevitable but necessary. "If we continue shutting ourselves off from the new," she countered, "we will doom ourselves to extinction, not from external forces, but from our own rigidity." While the leaders deliberated, Darren and Kalen returned to the Chamber of Towers to investigate the energy patterns they had previously discovered. The instability was intensifying. The towers, once pulsing with uniform harmony, now displayed chaotic rhythms as if struggling to adapt to a new reality. As Darren analyzed the data alongside Kalen, he noticed something alarming yet fascinating. The chaotic patterns were beginning to integrate, forming a more complex and resilient network. "This isn't destruction," he said, pointing to the energy flows. "It's reorganization." Kalen, both intrigued and worried, began to see her species in a new light. "We've always prided ourselves on our harmony," she said, her voice tinged with melancholy. But maybe that has blinded us to what truly matters. The ability to grow. Darren, with his pragmatic perspective, replied, "Harmony without adaptation is just stagnation. The real challenge isn't preserving who you are. It's discovering who you can become." Meanwhile, the situation in Arx worsened. The towers began to release energy surges that threatened to destabilize the Eternal City's very infrastructure. Psychic fissures appeared in the skies, generating storms that even the Xerathis advanced sensors couldn't predict. Xerathis, viewing the chaos as a validation of his position, intensified his efforts to convince the council to approve his proposal. "This is the cost of unpredictability," he declared as the storms raged outside. "If we don't cut the root of this disorder, it will consume us." Kalen, however, began rallying support among the younger leaders, who were starting to see the tower disconnection as a desperate and short-sighted solution. "Destroying the system won't save us," she argued in private conversations. "We need to understand what's happening and work with it, not against it." To many, Kalen's courage and clarity were inspiring. To Xerathis, however, she was a growing threat. Amid this tension, Darren proposed a bold plan: fully open the psychic network, allowing the unstable energies to reorganize freely. "The system is trying to adapt," he explained during a meeting with Kalen and her supporters, "but it's being hindered by the barriers you've created. If we remove those barriers, we can give the towers a chance to stabilize." Kalen understood the risks. "If this fails," she said, "there will be nothing left to save." Darren, with his characteristic determination, replied, "Failure is part of the process. You need to trust that you can overcome it." The decision to implement the plan met immediate resistance. Upon learning of the proposal, Xerathis accused Kalen and Darren of treason. "You're gambling with the survival of our entire species," he bellowed, calling for an emergency session of the council to block the initiative. But before he could rally enough support, a new crisis struck the Eternal City. One of the primary towers collapsed, unleashing a wave of energy that nearly destroyed the council chamber. The impact was devastating, but it also opened the eyes of many leaders. "If we continue as we are," one of the elder leaders said, "there will be nothing left to preserve." With the council's reluctant approval, Darren's plan was set into motion. He and Kalen led a team to remove the barriers within the network, allowing the energies to flow freely. The process was chaotic and perilous. Energy surges created storms that threatened to consume the Chamber of Towers, and every barrier removed seemed to push the system closer to collapse. But gradually, something began to change. The towers, once unstable, started to pulse with a new rhythm, not uniform, but harmonious in its complexity. The plan's partial success was met with a mix of relief and uncertainty. The towers were stabilizing, but the system was now unrecognizable. For the Xerathis, this was not merely a technical change but a transformation of their very identity. "We're no longer what we were," Kalen said as she observed the towers pulsating with a new light. "But maybe that's exactly what we needed." Xerathis, seeing his influence wane, withdrew from the council, but not without a warning. "You're celebrating what you don't understand," he said, his voice laden with disapproval. "And eventually it will destroy you." Kalen, though aware of the risks, responded with newfound conviction. "Perhaps," she said, "but if we don't try, we'll never know what we could have been." As Darren watched Ark's transformation, he felt a mix of satisfaction and humility. He knew there was still much to be done, but what had happened here was a milestone. "They're learning," he thought, "and that's more than I could have hoped for." Yet deep down, he also knew the real test was still to come. The reconfiguration of the psychic network brought a superficial calm to Arx. The towers, which had previously pulsed erratically, now glowed with a renewed energy, though no longer uniform. The perfect harmony that had defined the Xerathis for millennia was irrevocably altered. In the Chamber of Towers, Kalen observed the new patterns with a mix of admiration and concern. "They're functioning," she said to Darren, who stood beside her. "But not in the way we expected." For Darren, this wasn't a problem. "Sometimes what we expect isn't what we need," he replied. As the towers adjusted, something began to shift among the Xerathis themselves. Their minds, once connected by a homogeneous flow of thoughts and emotions, were now starting to develop more defined individual traits. Leaders who once thought as a single body now debated more fervently, while younger members expressed ideas that would have been immediately dismissed before. For many, this was liberating. For others, like Xerathis, it was the beginning of the end. "We've become fragmented," he said during a tense council meeting. "And a fragment cannot survive the impact." Kaelin, now one of the most influential voices in the council, disagreed. "What you call fragmentation," she argued, "I call diversity. And diversity is what will allow us to face challenges we never imagined." Although many began to support her vision, there was a growing unease among the Xerathis. Change was uncomfortable, and the first signs of internal conflict started to emerge. Conservative factions, led by Xerathis and his followers, began organizing to reverse the process, arguing that the transformation was a threat to their species' survival. Meanwhile, Darren accompanied Kaelin in her efforts to stabilize the situation. He knew that internal conflict was inevitable but believed it was necessary. "All change meets resistance," he told Kaelin as they analyzed data from the towers. "What matters is proving that the benefits outweigh the costs." For Kaelin, this was the most challenging part. She knew many Xerathis feared losing their collective identity, a fear she herself was beginning to feel. "What if they're right?" she asked Darren in a moment of vulnerability. "What if we lose ourselves in the process?" Darren, with his characteristic calm, replied, "You're not losing yourselves. You're finding yourselves. That's what growth means." His words gave Kaelin the strength to continue, but the situation was far from resolved. A new crisis arose when one of the oldest towers, known as the Central Pillar, began to fail. This tower was the anchor of the psychic network, and its complete collapse could destabilize the entire system. For Xerathis, this was proof that the transformation was unsustainable. "I warned this would happen," he declared to the council. "And now we stand on the brink of disaster." Kaelin, however, saw the Central Pillar's collapse as an opportunity. "If we can integrate it into the new system," she said, "we can create an even stronger foundation. But it will require something we've never attempted before: opening our minds completely." This idea was met with skepticism but also curiosity. For the Xerathis, fully opening their minds meant abandoning the barriers that had kept their individuality limited. It was a risk, but also a chance to redefine themselves as a species. With the council's reluctant approval, Kaelin and Darren led a team to stabilize the Central Pillar. The process was incredibly dangerous. The tower's released energies were unstable and could destroy the Eternal City if not controlled. As they worked, Darren noticed something curious. The pillar's energies seemed to respond to the emotions of the Xerathis around it. When they were in harmony, the energies flowed smoothly. When there was conflict, the energies became volatile. "This isn't just technology," he told Kaelin. "It's a reflection of you." This revelation changed the team's approach. Instead of trying to control the Central Pillar, they began working with it, adjusting the energy flows to reflect the new dynamics of the network. The process required a level of collaboration the Xerathis had never experienced before, but also revealed something profound. Their strength lay not in perfect harmony, but in their ability to align despite their diversity. The operation's success brought a sense of relief but also uncertainty. The Central Pillar was integrated into the new system, but its energy now pulsed with a complexity that defied the Xerathis' understanding. For Xerathis and his followers, this was a sign they had lost control. For Kaelin and the others, it was proof they had gained something far more valuable: the ability to grow. "We are no longer what we were," Kaelin said to the council. "But perhaps that's what makes us stronger." Xerathis, seeing his influence diminish, withdrew from the council, but not without leaving a warning. "You celebrate what you don't understand," he said, his voice heavy with disapproval. "And eventually it will destroy you." Kaelin, aware of the risks, responded with newfound conviction. "Perhaps," she said, "but if we don't try, we'll never know what we could have been." As Darren observed Ark's transformation, he felt a mix of satisfaction and caution. He knew the change was only the beginning and that challenges still lay ahead. But for the first time, he saw a glimpse of what the Xerathis could become. "They're learning," he thought, And perhaps, in the process, they're teaching us as well. The integration of the central pillar brought a new dynamic to arcs. The towers pulsed with an irregular yet vibrant rhythm, and the energy patterns, once rigid and predictable, now reflected a dynamic complexity that felt alive. For Kaylin, this was a sign of progress. For the first time, she said to Darren as they observed the towers, "We are evolving instead of merely existing." But for Cronies and his followers, it was unacceptable. "This is not evolution," he declared during a tense council session. "It is the destruction of everything that makes us Xerathis." The council was now divided into two clear factions. On one side, Kaylin led those who believed change was essential for the survival and growth of the Xerathis. On the other, Cronies championed those who feared the transformation was eroding their collective identity. As debates raged, Darren noticed something crucial. "The conflict isn't just between individuals," he said to Kaylin. "It's within the Xerathis themselves. They are fighting against what they've always believed to be true. But that means they're starting to question. And questioning is the first step to learning." The turning point came when Cronies called for a final vote in the council to decide ARC's future. His proposal was simple but extreme. Disconnect the central pillar and restore the network's original harmony, even if it meant sacrificing the changes already made. "We can return to what we were," he said with cold conviction. "Or we can lose ourselves forever in this chaos." Kaylin, however, presented the opposite vision. "We are not losing ourselves," she argued. "We are finding ourselves. And that is something worth protecting." As the council deliberated, a new crisis shook the Eternal City. The psychic storms, which had subsided after the central pillar's integration, returned with full force, now accompanied by ruptures on Ark's surface. The planet, always a reflection of the Xerathis' psychic stability, was reacting to their internal conflict. "What's happening to the planet?" Kaylin asked Darren as they analyzed the data. "Is what's happening to us." For Darren, this confirmed that transformation was not just necessary but inevitable. "You can't go back," he said, "but you can choose how to move forward." With the vote looming, Cronies made one last move. He rallied his most loyal followers to attempt a forced disconnection of the central pillar, claiming the council was failing to protect the species' interests. When Kaylin learned of the plan, she and Darren rushed to stop the sabotage. The confrontation at the central pillar was intense, not just physically but emotionally. Cronies confronted Kaylin directly, accusing her of betraying their species. "You are leading us to destruction," he said, his voice echoing with anger. Kaylin, though visibly shaken, stood firm. "I'm not destroying anything," she replied. "I'm giving us a chance to be more than we ever were." During the clash, the central pillar's energies began reacting to the conflict, releasing waves that threatened to destabilize the entire network. At that moment, Darren made a bold decision. He stepped into the pillar's core, exposing his mind to the unstable energies. "If this is about understanding what it means to change," he said, "then let me be the example." Kaylin tried to stop him, but Darren knew his presence was the catalyst needed to resolve the conflict. "You need to see what it means to face the unknown," he said before disappearing into the core. Darren's interaction with the central pillar triggered an unprecedented event. The chaotic energies began to align, forming a new network that integrated both the harmony of the Xerathis and the complexity of humanity. The impact was immediate. The psychic storms ceased, and Ark's surface began to stabilize. For the Xerathis, this was not just a technical victory but a profound revelation. "He showed us," Kaylin said, tears in her eyes, "that strength is not about control. It's about courage." When Darren emerged from the core, exhausted but alive, he was met with a mix of relief and admiration. Even Cronies, though reluctant, acknowledged that something had changed. "Perhaps I underestimated you," he admitted before withdrawing to reflect on his place in a world he no longer recognized. For Kaylin, the moment marked a turning point. "We are no longer the Xerathis we once were," she said to the council. "But perhaps that is what will make us truly great." With the central pillar stabilized and the new network functioning, the Eternal City began to flourish once again. The towers glowed with a light more vibrant than ever, and the Xerathis, though still divided, were beginning to accept their new reality. For Darren, the mission was complete, but he knew the work was far from over. "You have the chance to lead by example," he said to Kalen before departing. "Don't waste it." Arx would never be the same again. Under the glow of the reformed towers, the Eternal City pulsed with an energy that felt more alive than ever. The transformation of the Xerathis was far from complete, but the first step had been taken. For Kalen, now leading a divided council, the path ahead was uncertain but brimming with possibilities. "We are no longer a homogeneous whole," she said during her first session as moderator of the council. "We are parts learning to connect. And that is what makes us stronger." The Xerathis' new psychic network brought about unexpected changes. Individuality, once suppressed by collective harmony, began to flourish, generating ideas and perspectives that had never been considered before. This brought conflict but also innovation. For Kalen, this was the true strength of her species, the ability to find unity within diversity. "We are not perfect," she told a group of young leaders. "But that is exactly why we have so much potential." Darren, meanwhile, prepared to leave Arx. He knew his mission was complete, yet he felt a deep connection to the planet and its people. Before departing, he and Kalen shared one last conversation in the Chamber of Towers. "You gave us more than answers," she said with a smile that reflected both gratitude and respect. "You gave us the courage to ask." Darren, visibly moved, replied, "And you showed me that even the oldest species can still learn something new." As Darren boarded his ship, he looked at the Eternal City one last time. The towers shone with a light that was not just physical but symbolic, a reflection of a species beginning to reinvent itself. They have a lot of work ahead, he thought, but for the first time, they are ready to face it. The ship entered hyperspace, leaving behind a planet that had not only survived but found a new purpose. Back in the council chamber, Kalen reflected on the recent events. She knew the transformation of the Xerathis would be a long and, at times, painful process, but she also understood its necessity. "What happened here," she said during a meeting, "is not just about us. It's an example of what the entire galaxy can achieve if it has the courage to embrace the unknown." Her words echoed in the minds of the leaders, planting a seed of hope and determination. The story ends with a vision of Arx, its towers shining brightly under a starry sky. In space, Darren's ship disappears toward new horizons, carrying with it the lessons learned on a planet that defied expectations. The universe, vast and unpredictable, seemed a little more connected. And deep down, both the Xerathis and humanity knew that this connection was only the beginning of something much greater.